I never expected that buying my dream home would turn into a full-scale war. When I moved into this neighborhood, I thought I was settling into a peaceful, quiet place where I could enjoy my home, mind my business, and maybe make a few friends. What I didn't know was that I had unknowingly stepped into Karen's kingdom, an HOA-run nightmare where one woman had decided she ruled over everyone. It started the very first week. I was barely unpacked when I found the first passive-aggressive note taped to my door. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Just a friendly reminder that lawns must be maintained at all times to comply with HOA regulations." Weird. I had barely been there a few days and my lawn wasn't even overgrown. But okay, whatever. Maybe she was just overly enthusiastic about rules. Then the next morning, another note. Trash bins must be precisely aligned with the curb to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. Please correct this immediately. I went outside and checked. My bins were exactly where every other neighbor had placed theirs. Why was I the only one getting warnings? By the end of the first week, the notes escalated into official-looking violations tucked into my mailbox. Porch light too bright at night. Lawn not trimmed to proper height. Car parked facing the wrong direction in the driveway. It was ridiculous. And no matter what I did to comply, she always found something new. Then I met her in person. I was trimming my hedges one afternoon when I heard a loud, exaggerated ahem behind me. I turned around to see a middle-aged woman standing at the edge of my yard, arms crossed, a clipboard in one hand. Her expression, pure superiority. "Hello there," she said, in a tone that made it very clear she didn't actually want to say hello at all. "I'm Karen. I run the HOA. She didn't introduce herself as a neighbor. She didn't ask how I was settling in. Just straight to business, like she was a queen addressing her subject. I wiped my hands off and gave a polite nod. "Nice to meet you, Karen." Her lips pursed slightly. "I noticed you received a few notices. We take HOA compliance very seriously around here." I was already getting the vibe that this wasn't a conversation. It was a warning. "Yeah, I saw the notes," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I've been fixing the issues as they come up." Her expression didn't change. "Good, because we have very high standards in this community. Some people find it difficult to fit in when they don't respect the rules." That last part? It wasn't just a comment, it was a thinly veiled threat. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the rules. This was about me. For whatever reason, Karen had decided I didn't belong, and she was going to do everything in her power to make my life hell. But what she didn't know? I'm not the kind of person who backs down easily. The weeks went by, and the harassment only escalated. I'd wake up to find anonymous complaints sent to the HOA board, clearly written by Karen herself. One day she even had the audacity to knock on my door with a measuring tape in hand, claiming she needed to verify that my porch decorations weren't too close to the sidewalk. It was beyond petty. It was obsessive. I had a decision to make: ignore her or fight back. At first, I tried to be the bigger person. I adjusted my lawn, my bins, even my porch lights. But the more I complied, the more ridiculous the complaints became. Karen didn't just want me to follow the rules. She wanted control. And when she realized I wasn't going to be her newest victim, that's when she made her biggest mistake. It was a Tuesday morning when I checked my mailbox and saw a thick envelope stamped with the HOA logo. I sighed. Another fine? Another notice about my garden gnome being a public nuisance? Nope. It was worse. I opened the envelope and read the first few lines. Then I read them again. It was an eviction notice. I blinked. What? I owned my home. How could I possibly be evicted? I read further. The letter, written in Karen's usual condescending tone, claimed that my property did not align with the established aesthetic and community guidelines, and that due to multiple infractions and ongoing disputes, the HOA had initiated the process to have me removed from the premises. It even warned that failure to comply could result in foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure? That wasn't just a scare tactic. Some HOAs were notorious for abusing obscure bylaws to financially pressure homeowners into leaving. But that wasn't going to work on me, because Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. See, Karen thought she was in charge. She thought she had all the power. But she had overlooked one very important detail. I owned a few rental properties, and as I skimmed through the eviction notice, my brain suddenly connected the dots. Karen's address looked familiar. I pulled up my property management files and scrolled through the list of rental agreements. And there it was. Karen's lease agreement, signed, dated, and guess whose name was listed as the property owner? Mine. Karen wasn't just my overbearing HOA neighbor. She wasn't just some power-hungry board member. She was my tenant. She had just sent her landlord an eviction notice. It took everything in me not to burst out laughing. She had no idea that the eviction notice she sent me, I could turn around and send right back to her. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of it all. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought she was in control. But she had just handed me the perfect reason to kick her out of my house, and I was going to make sure she felt every second of it. She wanted a war? She was about to get a battle she'd never forget. I didn't respond to the eviction notice immediately. No, this was too good to waste on a simple email. Karen had declared war, and I was going to make sure she regretted it in the most satisfying way possible. I spent that evening going through every single page of her lease agreement, carefully reviewing every term and condition. By the time I was done, I had a list of violations longer than the HOA's so-called community standards. Harassment of neighbors? Check. Unauthorized modifications to the property? Those ridiculous HOA signs she had installed on my lawn without permission? Check. Interference with legal property ownership? Oh, that was a big check. Karen had unknowingly broken multiple lease terms. She wasn't just an annoying HOA president. She was a nightmare tenant. I drafted a formal termination of lease notice, citing every violation in black and white. She had 30 days to vacate the property. If she failed to comply, I would escalate to a formal eviction through the courts, and then with the notice in hand, I walked right up to her house. She was outside as usual, patrolling the neighborhood like some kind of self-appointed enforcer, giving a poor old man grief about his garden fence being half an inch too high. I took my time, walked nice and slow, making sure she saw me coming. She turned, arms crossed, her smug expression already in place. She loved being in control. "I assume you got the notice," she said, tilting her chin up. "Nothing personal, but the HOA has made a decision. You don't fit the standards of this community, and we simply can't have that." I smiled, savoring the moment. "Oh, I got the notice," I said, pulling the envelope from my pocket. "And I have a response." She barely spared it a glance before rolling her eyes. "Listen, the decision is final. There's no point in fighting it. If you refuse to leave, we'll proceed with legal action, and trust me, you don't want that." I nodded. "You're right. Legal action is serious business." Then I handed her the termination notice. Her smirk faltered as she took it. Her eyes scanned the document. And then, as realization dawned, her entire face drained of color. This is a joke, right?" she stammered. "Nope," I said, arms crossed. "Your lease is terminated. You have 30 days to vacate. Failure to comply will result in a formal eviction." She froze, gripping the paper like it was a live grenade. "You don't have the authority to do this." "Oh, but I do." I tapped the notice. "See, Karen, the house you're renting? It belongs to me. You sent me an eviction notice without realizing that you've been living on my property this entire time." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't, this isn't." I leaned in slightly. "Either you step down from your little HOA throne, or you step out of my house. Your choice." For the first time since I moved in, Karen had no comeback. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, holding her own eviction notice in her trembling hands. The next morning, I woke up to a new email from the HOA. I didn't even have to open it to know exactly who was behind it. The subject line? Illegal eviction notice. Violation of HOA bylaws. I almost laughed. Of course, she went crying to the HOA. When I opened the email, it was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense. "Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have engaged in unauthorized eviction proceedings against a resident of our community. The HOA has strict rules against retaliatory actions and unlawful displacement of residents. Any attempts to remove a member of this community without due process will result in immediate fines and further legal action. Please consider this your official warning." Immediate fines? Legal action? Oh, this was rich. Karen was desperately trying to use the HOA as her personal weapon, thinking she could intimidate me into backing down. But what she failed to realize was that HOA rules don't override state landlord-tenant laws. I wasn't evicting her out of spite. I was removing a tenant who had violated her lease. That wasn't an HOA issue. That was landlord business. I sat down at my desk, cracked my knuckles, and drafted my reply. "Dear HOA compliance team, I appreciate your concern regarding unlawful evictions. However, Karen is not a resident. In the sense you describe, she is my tenant. As the legal owner of her property, I have the right to terminate her lease for cause, which I have done in accordance with state and federal housing laws. My decision is not subject to HOA oversight. Furthermore, any attempts by the HOA to interfere with lawful landlord-tenant matters could be considered harassment, for which I am prepared to take legal action if necessary. Best regards, your favorite landlord." I hit send and sat back, completely satisfied. Karen could try to play this game, but she was about to learn the hard way that she wasn't as powerful as she thought. That afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch, and I instantly knew why they were here. "Sir, we need to speak with you regarding a complaint," one of them said. I sighed, already exhausted by the sheer pettiness of the situation. "Let me guess. Karen called you?" The officers exchanged a glance. "She did. She claims you're attempting an unlawful eviction and using intimidation tactics." I almost burst out laughing. Of course she would try this route. I stepped aside. "Come on in, officers. I have plenty to show you." I pulled out every document: the lease agreement, the eviction notice, the multiple violations of her lease terms. I even showed them the HOA's ridiculous email and my professional response shutting them down. The officers carefully reviewed everything. Then one of them sighed and looked at his partner. "This is completely legal," he muttered. "She's not being evicted unlawfully." The other officer nodded and turned back to me. "Sorry about this, sir. This happens more often than you'd think. Some people don't understand that HOA rules don't override property laws." I let out a dry laugh. Yeah, I'm getting that impression. The officers left shortly after, but before they did, one of them knocked on Karen's door. I couldn't hear everything they said, but I definitely caught the tail end of it. "Ma'am, this is a civil issue, not a police matter. Do not call us again unless there's a real emergency." And with that, Karen's little house of cards started to crumble. She had lost the HOA battle. She had lost the legal battle. And now she was running out of time because in just a few short weeks, eviction day was coming. and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Karen wasn't going to go quietly. That much became obvious the day after the police shut her down. Instead of accepting the inevitable, she went into full-blown survival mode. She wasn't just angry, she was desperate. And desperate people, they do stupid things. The first thing she tried was a bogus harassment complaint against me. I woke up to an email from some random legal-sounding department claiming that I had been reported for creating a hostile living environment. The email was vague, full of corporate jargon, and honestly hilariously dramatic. Your repeated actions against a fellow community member have resulted in a formal complaint. We take these issues very seriously, and failure to comply with community standards may result in additional consequences. Additional consequences? I owned her house. The only consequence was that she was about to be homeless. But instead of replying to the nonsense email, I forwarded it straight to my lawyer, who promptly laughed and said, "Let them try. She has no case." That same day, I got another knock on my door. HOA Karen, round 3. Except this time, she wasn't smiling. Her smug confidence was gone. In its place, a mixture of barely contained rage and pure panic. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she snapped the moment I opened the door. I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, if you're here to chat, I suggest you start with a hello." She shoved a piece of paper toward me. "I spoke with the HOA. They are not recognizing your so-called eviction. You are violating community guidelines and—" I held up a finger. Ah. Landlord laws override HOA rules. And before you waste any more of my time, just know that I already had my attorney review your little complaint." She blinked rapidly, her breathing growing heavier. "You can't just throw me out." I crossed my arms. "Karen, I gave you a legal 30-day notice. You broke your lease. You have 2 options. Pack your things and leave like an adult, or wait until the sheriff escorts you out." She clenched her jaw so tight I thought she might break a tooth. Then, without another word, she stormed off, practically vibrating with rage. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare. For her, not me. She tried everything. First, she blasted emails to the entire HOA board, demanding that they override my illegal actions. They ignored her. Then she tried recruiting neighbors, knocking on doors, claiming I was some evil landlord abusing my power. Did anyone believe her? Not a single person. Turns out she had burned every bridge in that community. Nobody liked her. People had been dealing with her power trips for years. They weren't just ignoring her. Some were actually celebrating the fact that she was getting kicked out. One guy even had the nerve to send me a thank you card. Finally, someone took down the queen. I kept it on my fridge. With her influence crumbling, Karen went full scorched earth. She stopped paying rent, thinking it would stall the eviction process. Spoiler, it didn't. She started trashing the house, leaving garbage everywhere, peeling paint off the walls, and slamming doors so hard that a cabinet broke off its hinges. And then she stopped answering the door altogether. Whenever I or my property manager tried to check on the house, she'd hide inside, refusing to acknowledge us. She thought she could drag this out. What she didn't realize? The clock was already ticking, because eviction day was coming fast. On the morning of eviction day, I stood outside the house waiting. A few neighbors had gathered nearby, clearly enjoying the show. And then, right on schedule, a sheriff's vehicle pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, clipboard in hand, and marched straight to Karen's door. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. The lead officer sighed and turned to me. "She's still inside?" "Yep." "All right, let's do this the hard way." He signaled to the locksmith, who stepped forward and started working on the door. That's when we all heard it, the sound of furniture being thrown. Karen was inside, having a full meltdown. Then suddenly, bang! She kicked something over. The officer knocked a final time. "Ma'am, if you do not comply, we will remove you by force." Silence. Then a loud stomping shuffle as Karen stormed toward the door. It swung open, and there she stood, a complete mess. Her hair was disheveled, her face was red with rage, and her hands were shaking with fury. "This is illegal," she screeched. "You can't do this. I have rights." The sheriff's deputy didn't flinch. "Ma'am, your lease has been legally terminated. You were given 30 days' notice. Today is your final warning. If you do not leave now, we will escort you out by force." Karen looked around, her wild eyes scanning for support, but there was none. The HOA silent. The neighbors watching with mild amusement. Me leaning against my car, sipping my coffee. She had lost. She took a deep breath, fists clenching, and for a moment I thought she was going to charge at me. But then her face crumbled, and without another word, she stormed inside to grab her bags. A few minutes later, she dragged a suitcase out the door, her movements sharp and jerky with pure humiliation. She glared at me, her face twisted in hatred. "You'll regret this," she spat. I smiled. "Enjoy your next HOA, Karen." She turned, stomped to her car, and sped off without another word. As soon as she was gone, the locksmith changed the locks, and the sheriff handed me the final eviction paperwork. "She gave you a hard time, huh?" the officer said. I laughed. "You have no idea." He chuckled. "Well, at least it's over now." And it was. Karen, the nightmare of the neighborhood, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the tyrant who tried to kick me out, was gone for good. As I turned back toward my house, a neighbor gave me a slow clap. "You, my friend, are a damn hero," he said. I grinned, just doing my civic duty. And with that, I finally enjoyed my first Karen-free moment of peace. No more notes, no more petty fines, no more HOA power trips. Just me, my home, and a neighborhood that was finally free from her reign. And that was the sweetest victory of all. The moment Karen's car disappeared down the street, I took the deepest breath I had taken in months. It was finally over. The neighbors who had gathered to witness the spectacle slowly trickled back into their homes, some shaking their heads, others grinning like they had just watched the season finale of their favorite drama series. One older gentleman, Mr. Patterson, walked up to me and clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Son, I've lived in this neighborhood for 25 years, and I have never seen justice served so beautifully." I chuckled, glad I could be of service. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like he was about to share a government secret. "Between you and me, half this neighborhood was just waiting for someone to take her down. You have no idea how many people she fined over nonsense. Hell, she once tried to fine me for unauthorized bird feeders. Can you believe that?" I raised an eyebrow. "Bird feeders? Really?" Mr. Patterson nodded. "She claimed they disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. But the real reason? She didn't like the birds pooping near her driveway." We both laughed, and for the first time since moving in, I felt like I truly belonged here. With Karen gone, the entire mood of the neighborhood shifted. People actually came outside again. Neighbors who used to keep their heads down started chatting in their yards. It was like some invisible weight had been lifted off the entire community. It didn't take long for the rumors to spread. Some said Karen moved in with her sister across town, completely humiliated and unable to show her face in public. Others swore they saw her storming into an HOA meeting somewhere else, already trying to worm her way back into power. Honestly, I didn't care. She was out of my life for good. Or so I thought. A few days later, I was enjoying my first peaceful morning in months when my inbox lit up with an email from the HOA. I groaned. What now? But when I opened it, I nearly spit out my coffee. Dear homeowner, due to a recent vacancy on the HOA board, we are reaching out to respected members of the community to extend an invitation for board membership. As an involved and valued homeowner, we believe you would be an excellent candidate to help shape the future of our neighborhood. I stared at the screen for a good minute before bursting into actual laughter. Karen had spent years running this neighborhood like her own personal kingdom, and now, with her throne empty, they wanted me to take her place. I imagined Karen, wherever she was, finding out that her worst enemy, the man she tried to evict from his own home, was being offered her position. The absolute rage she must have felt. I was tempted, if only to rub salt in the wound. Just imagine it. Me, sitting at the head of the HOA table, making actual reasonable decisions, undoing every insane rule Karen had put in place. Remove all the absurd fines? Done. Let people have their damn bird feeders? Approved. Make sure no one ever gets harassed for their porch lights again? Absolutely. It would be poetic justice. But then I thought about it a little more. Karen had let power consume her. She had made the HOA her entire identity, a way to control others because she had nothing else going on in her life. And me? I had better things to do than sit in long, boring meetings, arguing over the height of someone's mailbox. So instead, I politely declined the offer and went about my day, knowing full well that I had already won. The weeks passed and life finally settled into normalcy. I didn't realize just how much stress Karen had added to my life until she was gone. Suddenly, my mornings were peaceful. No new violation notices, no petty complaints, no random emails threatening bogus fines. The HOA, without their power-hungry queen, actually mellowed out. The remaining board members seemed embarrassed by how much Karen had run wild, and they started backtracking on a lot of her nonsense policies. I actually started enjoying my home. And just to add a little extra cherry on top, I heard from a former HOA board member that Karen had tried to appeal her eviction, only to find out that the case was so airtight that no lawyer would take it. She had officially lost. The last I ever heard of her, someone spotted her at a different HOA meeting across town, already trying to worm her way into another board position. But this time, she wouldn't have my house to rule over. She wouldn't have my neighborhood to terrorize, and she was someone else's problem now. And that was the real victory. Moral of the story? If you're going to start a war, make sure you're not living in your enemy's house.